Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. Cleared table, black cloth out. Must be 2021 Project Orchids time. This will be part 2, the Dendrobiums. I will put a info card up near the beginning of the video, so sort of any time now you'll see the little eye pop up. That will take you to the video that we did 3 months ago showing the initial look of these plants, so effectively the start of the project. So this goes over the 5 plants. We'll discuss that in a minute. That goes over the 5 plants that were selected partly by yourselves and partly by me to create the Dendrobium set for 2021. And we benchmarked those plants at the beginning of the season. And then the idea of this first update is to revisit those plants as they were then in the form of a still with a commentary, and that will be followed by a video clip of each plant as they are today, and we'll discuss the progress they've made over the first 3 months of the season and my hopes for the rest of the season, taking us on towards part 2, which will come in another 3 months' time. So that's the way the Project Orchids work. So basically what I will say is that the other parts 1, 3 and 4 all had 6 orchids in, and for some strange reason the Dendrobium set only had 5, so I've added 1 in. But you'll have to watch to the end of the video to see what number 6 is. But I've basically added 1 in just to bring the numbers up to the same as the others, so they've all got 6. So let's get going with the first one. Okay then, this is the Dendrobium primulinum variety Laos, which is the one with the yellow in the centre. I haven't had this plant too long, and it's yet to bloom. So I wasn't sure whether last year's growths would actually put some blooms out. They kept their leaves through the winter, but they were starting to show yellow at the beginning of the season, which is sort of normal, I suppose. But the plant itself doesn't look big enough to be a primulinum, unless the Laos variety just happens to be a smaller plant. That remains to be seen, but we're going to have every opportunity to find that out. As you can see, we've got 2 nice new growths coming at the base of the plant, base of each of last year's canes basically, so something to grow on. Okay, so last time we looked at this one, these canes were not very visible because these 2 canes, which grew last year, they're my canes, were leaved. So the leaves covered up these canes, viewing like this. And right at the top of the plant were 2 brand new growths. Well, what we've got now is the 2 brand new growths are pushing on nicely. They'll obviously continue to grow, I would say, this time until the canes reach full size, whatever that is. It's still difficult to tell, but you know, if you look at the longest, oldest cane, it's longer than the 2 canes I grew last year, but much thinner. So it's difficult to know what these canes really should look like. The new growths have pushed out quite a few roots, pleased with that. The little growth on the right hand side, a lot of the roots basically attached to the mount, which is good. The roots that came out on the left, most of those went up in the moss and sort of came out the other side and out the top. So we've got a good root system on it now, replenished by this year's stocks basically, and 2 nice healthy canes growing on. The length they're going to get to this year is undetermined. I mean, effectively my original one of this, not the variety, had canes a lot longer than this. So I really don't know what this is going to do. But feed and water well while it's actively growing, which is what it's doing. So we'll carry on doing that and see where we get to. Okay, last time back in March we had a look at this one, and we had basically the very tiny start of a new growth at the base of the plant, probably not even visible in this still. And what we did have on the latest cane were two nice buds starting to swell up. They still had quite a bit of work to do because the blooms on this are large, to say the least. So the plant was basically just coming into growth, no sign of new roots or anything at this point in time, and also coming into bloom on the latest cane. The other two canes, the tall one to the right at the back and the not so tall one near the front, have both bloomed. They've got little stubs where the bud spikes were. So, you know, this is a good blooming sized division, because that's what it is. It's certainly not a seedling. So something to grow on, and at this particular point in time, definitely looking forward to those blooms. They're large, they're absolutely gorgeous basically, and they last a long time. Unfortunately, no detectable fragrance. Right, well, last time we looked at this one we had two buds and no new growths and not a lot of root activity, but coming into bloom at that particular time. So obviously those two buds have opened up nicely now and are lasting incredibly well, and they were followed by a third bud that came out from lower down the cane, down here. Yeah, so this one will prolong the length of the blooming by quite a bit, I suspect. Now down at the base of the plant now, we do have a nice strong new growth pushing on, and we do have root activity. So it's replenishing its stocks with the roots. Now this has not been repotted since I got it, which may now be determined as a mistake, but I'm not going to repot it now, even though the new roots are growing, simply because it's in good bark. There's nothing wrong with this bark. So I'm going to leave it as is, enjoy the blooms and let that new growth push on, which will increase the root mass in the pot considerably. Now on this particular plant we do have two older canes, and this one has bloomed. I don't think this one has, or it's possibly possible that that one's bloomed. But anyway, this one's putting on a good show at the moment. This bloom will last at least 2 months. I'm not quite sure how much longer these are going to last, but they've been with us a long time. Have a nice close-up on the latest one. Light's not very good, but with this magic touch where you want it to focus, and it does, seems to do pretty well. But I just love the colour of that lip. Absolutely gorgeous. So there we go. This one is coming into growth mode with the new cane, just the one, and that's probably all there will be. Just as a point, this is a black hair type, and it's the new growths where you really see that. I wonder if I can do a close-up on that. The thing will focus on a cane rather than a bloom. But that's where you can see the black hairs most obvious, is when the cane is nice and new. That's when they show up the most. So there we go, that's pushing on. That will grow on up to full size this season, we hope, and probably bloom next year. And it's still possible to bloom on older canes on this type, but we'll see how it goes. But this is what I hope to achieve, a cane as big and as plump as that one. That's the goal for this year. Okay, so there we go, that's that one. Quite tall, that one. Next we move on to the Dendrobium in a bucket. Now you don't get the impression of the size of that pot from this still. Perhaps it will show up better in the video that follows on. But at this particular point in time, the spectabile was not in growth mode, no signs of growth, roots or anything like that. My opinion is still that it's in a pot that's too big, but it's in quality bark, so it can stay like that for a while. We've got blooms at this point in time, and we should have had more blooms than that, but some clumsy clod actually broke a spike. Luckily another one followed on behind, but wouldn't it have been nice to have had 2 spikes like that on the same plant? Still, accidents happen, that's life. The most weird blooms, very alien-like, the Dendrobium spectabile. Weird, twisted, contorted, whatever you want to call it, but the markings are absolutely incredible. So looking forward to this coming into growth mode, probably having to wait until those blooms finish, but yet to find out about that. Okay, now we move on to the Dendrobium in a bucket. It certainly doesn't need a pot that big or anywhere near that big, but nonetheless it's quality bark, so well, let's let it get on with it. It seems to be growing okay. Last time we looked at this we had blooms, those have gone now, and been replaced by growth mode. So what we've got now is its first new growth for me, coming up from down here, and down in amongst there I'm sure there are some new roots too. I don't know how far the roots go in here, whether they go right to the edge or not. And slug pellets in, oh yeah, I did put slug pellets in there. I'll show you why. Bite marks, yeah. So that's not going to affect the function of those leaves and not going to affect the ability for that cane to bloom, but it spoils the look. Now this already has some tatty leaves on it, so it's not like I'm really upset. It also has some scale. I'll have to get out there. The scale are getting about now, and what's happened is I believe the weather is encouraging them to move for whatever reason, but it seems to be that they'll stay on the plant they're on and hopefully die with the treatment they get. But the weather we've been having lately, this shelf that this has come from has one plant that has had scale for some time. Unfortunately it's a black hair type, and it's the only one that when given a systemic didn't actually drop all of its leaves, only some of them. So I'm reluctant to put a systemic on it. But it's on the same shelf as this one that has never had scale. So I think those crawlers are actually on the move. So we might have to put some serious treatment into the grow room. You know, just literally mix up the large sprayer and just go round all the plants. The trouble is with the systemic treatment, you have to then do it again, and it's weather dependent. I'm not soaking every plant in the grow room at a time when those plants can't dry. Yeah, so and also you can't do it when it's hot because a lot of it evaporates before it gets into the plant. So it has to be weather dependent, and then you've got to do the second treatment so long after the first treatment. Anyway, that can be treated with a spot treatment, which I've got in a ready-made sprayer. It's just that one cane, and at the tip. It's one of their favourite places, down in there. This isn't a new growth. This isn't soft, succulent growth. This is just the tip of the cane, and that's where they are. On that cane, not on any others. Just that one. It's strange how they behave. But anyway, this one needs dealing with, as you can see. If you don't get on with it, it'll only get worse. They don't disappear on their own. You've got to deal with them. So I shall spray that one before we put it back. I doubt if we'll see any more blooms on this year. I wouldn't expect to see any. But certainly that latest cane should bloom at its appropriate time. We'll see how it grows. But the important thing is to grow a nice big fat cane, as it's the only one at the moment and is likely to be the only one. So there you go. Right, so the lindleyi was just starting to show spikes at this point in the season. This is not a late winter, early spring bloomer. It's more like a late spring into summer bloomer, which surprised me, but then I haven't had the plant long. It surprised me that it bloomed the first year, because I really hadn't had it long and I thought it was far too small. But then, last year we grew on some canes, those to the right hand end, the larger plumper ones, and we got some spikes at the appropriate time this year. And quite honestly, this puts on a good show for the size of the plant. The spikes hang down and have multiple blooms on. They're a good colour. There is a slight fragrance there, but it's not
it's not going to knock you senseless. You've got to get in close and all that sort of stuff. So at this particular point in time, we're about to come into bloom. I presume that's about the right time for this, but we've had a cold. We'd had a cold spell, or was still having it. I can't remember exactly. So that might have caused a few delays, because that would have reduced my daytime temperatures. So the plant may not have reacted quite so quickly to the rise in temperatures. Anyway, let's see what's going on now.
Right, last time we looked at this one, we had the nubbins, i.e. the start of the spikes. And we discovered that it can actually produce a spike on some very old bulbs. That not being like a previous year's growth, it's like probably the year before that. But anyway, that's we had, you know, those were the spikes basically. Since been trimmed off, long since gone. They don't last long, but it put on quite a good show. Now the surprising thing with this at this time of year is there is still no sign of new growths. Now that's odd. I'd have expected this to come back into growth by now, but it hasn't. We do have some root activity, which usually precedes the new growths, but this is the area I'd be expecting them to start, you know, where the largest canes are, the newest part of the plant, and hopefully at least one coming out this end, the older part of the plant. But at the moment, we have no new growth signs at all. That's odd, you know, bearing in mind, you know, they need to mature before we go into the depths of winter, and it should be resting. So yeah, it's difficult to say what this one's up to, but nonetheless it's a nice healthy plant, and it has roots, and it has now bloomed twice for me. It bloomed the first year when I really didn't expect it to, because it didn't get a rest, but it still bloomed, and we had blooms this year too. So all I can hope for this is that it does start its new growth quite soon, and they grow fast and get to mature to this sort of size. You know, those were the ones I grew from the previous year. That's the sort of mature size I'd like them to be. Now these new growths here didn't bloom this year, so that's where the spikes will come from next year. So it'll be that one sticking up the top, and those two there, and possibly one of these down here. So that's next year's blooms. But for the year after, we need to grow some new growths this year, and so far nothing. But like I say, it's a healthy plant, it's got a root system, it hydrates itself, and it should push on soon. Right, and here we have the tortile, again an unbloomed plant. Effectively it's not a plant, it's two plants. The original plant that came from Alberto in Italy, the main plant actually rotted. Luckily I managed to save the two kikis that it had at the time, and they've grown on reasonably nicely and produced two nice big fat canes, which come the spring, going back into March, I was half expecting some blooms on. But my thoughts were a little concerned, I suppose you'd say, on the grounds that it is a deciduous orchid and yet it still had its leaves on. Normally that type of orchid won't bloom on canes that have leaves on. So the fact that the leaves were still there, I was sort of thinking, well, either it's a late bloomer or it's not going to bloom on these two new canes. In which case, obviously, we would have to wait for some more. And you can just about see at the base the two new growths. As I said, it is two plants, so a new growth on each one. Maybe we'll have better luck with those two. Who knows? But it's a year to find out. Now with the Dendrobium tortile, I could actually say it's behaving strangely, but it would be based on nothing, because I haven't had it long enough to declare it behaving strangely. But you know, it has similarities to other dendrobiums I've got, and it's behaving differently, and that just may be the way it is, but we'll go over that. Quite a large proportion of mounted orchids in this set, simply because it's the dendrobium set and I mount an awful lot of my dendrobiums. Okay, so last time we looked at this, I discussed that there are in fact two separate plants here. This plant came from Alberto in Italy, and the main plant actually rotted, but the two kikis were saved, which was these two bits down here, and managed to grow on last year and produce two nice canes. And the strange behaviour is the fact they've still got their leaves on. I'd have thought by now these would have dropped. I'm happy that they're there because they feed the plant while they're still there and they're still green. So that puts extra energy into the plant that wouldn't otherwise be there. But what we've got is two nice new canes pushing on. And let's see if that will stand up like that. Yeah, just about, just so that you can see what the concept of the plant is. So the two new growths coming out the top, those are going to grow on to at least this size, I would expect this year. And I was half expecting the possibility of blooms on these two canes, and they didn't. So hopefully these two will bloom next year. And there's a remote possibility that these might as well, but I doubt it. I've got a feeling this is going to have a 2-year cycle. And a lot of that idea, that concept, which may be wrong, is the fact that it's keeping its leaves. Yeah? So if that's going to keep its leaves through this season and drop them come winter time, it's highly likely that that's when it's going to bloom, the following spring, after leaf drop. But we shall wait and see. Doing a massive root thing this year. Older roots branching out, new roots coming out the base of the two latest growths. So we've now got a much, much better root system than we had before. We've got two healthy new growths coming out, and the two last year's canes holding their leaves. If you look at it, the two original canes, you know, when these were just kikis, one of those has still got a dodgy leaf, but still got it. Terminal leaf. Anyway, so progress on this is basically the two new canes pushing on. More than two might have been nice, but possibly, you know, the size of this plant, bearing in mind it's a growing on kiki, it's not necessarily a blooming size plant yet. That remains to be seen. But I'm happy that this year we've got a lot more progress than last year, in as much as we've got another two canes the same as last year that hopefully will develop at least to that size, but we've done a massive lot of progress on the root system, and it's still doing it. You know, I've got growing tips all over this mount. So yeah, what I would like to see next year on this is some blooms. That's not going to happen during this season. All we're going to get for the rest of this season is growth and more roots. There'll come a time when those roots will stop. In other words, it's done its roots for the year. That probably won't coincide with the canes stopping growing. They may well grow on into the winter. That we'll have to wait and see. But you know, as I said, it's not a long-term plant for me. I haven't had it a huge amount of time. So, and it started with kikis and the potential for rot from the main plant that could have got into those kikis. Luckily, it didn't. But it's coming on. I'm pleased with the progress. Doing well. Now, in the initial look, in the Dendrobium set, we had 5. Now, all the other sets have got 6. I just cannot, for the life of me, remember what the logic was that the Dendrobiums only had 5. So I'm putting another one in at this stage. So in the first update, we're going to get a new plant. Okay, and then we'll follow that for the rest of the updates. So let's have a look and see what I've chosen. Okay, so number 6, which wasn't there in the last video obviously, is Dendrobium Kao Green. Now I've chosen this one because I'm not absolutely certain what type of Dendrobium it is, although it looks more like a Phalaenopsis type than anything else. But we're going to have to wait and see, simply because it could be from another section. I'm not sure. But nonetheless, it came from Jeff's, and by rights, being a Dendrobium, it should have gone in with all the other Dendrobiums from Jeff's as part of the national collection. But when I discussed it with Marius, it was not on the records. So it wasn't included in the National Collection for whatever reason, I don't know. So Marius said, if you want it, why don't you keep it? So I kept it. So this came from Jeff's. Now, a lot of the plants from Jeff's were pretty unhealthy. This one, I couldn't really tell whether it was unhealthy or not, but it didn't have very good roots at all. It was just a matter of, this cane looked really good. Yeah, and some of the leaves looked pretty good. You know, that's very leathery, very chunky and leathery. But since it got repotted, what we've got now is a nice stonking new growth with roots bursting out all over the place. They're literally breaking out of the base of the plant in large quantities, pushing the sheaths out of the way, you know, this stuff. So we've now got a progressing root system that is starting to get down into the pot just. So it's been repotted, it's got a strong new growth, it is creating a new root system, it's now going to be a good plant. And there is no reason why it shouldn't bloom on this cane. But without knowing what type of plant it is, what type of dendrobium, definitely, I don't know when it's going to do it. I mean, this short cane here actually bloomed out of the apex, which sort of sounds a bit like a phalaenopsis type, but that's not the only type that bloomed that way. And then over on this side, that again is a bit typical of phalaenopsis type, straight out of the apex, and then below a couple of leaves farther down. So, but what is nice on this is the coloration on the canes, irrespective of what the blooms are going to look like. These canes are absolutely stunning. Lovely green and a beautiful purple stripes. The cane itself is attractive, and that sort of carries on the new growth as well, because you can see the stripes starting to develop as the cane pushes up. So anyway, that's the one I've included as number 6. We'll find out more about this as it grows on this year, but until it blooms I'm not sticking my neck out and saying what type it is. So we'll have to wait and see. But obviously once I get blooms on it, I'll be able to tell. Despite the fact that it's a hybrid, you still backtrack and find out what's going on. So that's what I've included. It's now, I would class, a healthy plant. I wasn't sure when I got it whether it was going to push on or whether it was going to deteriorate due to its lack of roots. But it's now growing roots, irrespective of the fact it hasn't got many. And obviously, with a cane like that on a plant like this, it's got stored resources that could last an awful long time without roots. So I was hoping that the new root system would come before it started to shrivel and desiccate, which it's now done. So new growth, new roots, and a sort of unknown type of dendrobium. So that's number 6. Okay, so that was update 1 for part 2, the dendrobiums, and we will get on to part 3 in the not too distant future, because I've got to get all 4 parts done in June to make this sort of work on a 3-month cycle. So we'll be on to part 3 in the not too distant future. So that was the dendrobiums and the progress they've made so far in the first 3 months of the season, and we'll rejoin them when we get to update 2 in 3 months' time. Hope you've enjoyed it and this type of video, and see you next time. Thanks for dropping by.